Picture yourself stepping into Victorian London, a city alive with contradictions. The streets are glowing faintly under the flicker of gas lamps, but the air is thick with smoke, fog, and the constant hum of life. Horses clatter over cobblestones. Vendors call out their wares. A faint drizzle mixes with the soot drifting down from factories. Everything feels both alive and exhausted at the same time. People walk quickly, collars turned up against the damp air, faces pale and pinched. And here, in this restless city, almost everyone is carrying some kind of secret remedy in their pocket or sitting on a dusty shelf back home. Not a question of whether you'll take something, but what exactly you'll choose to get through the day. Life in the mid-1800s wasn't soft. There was no Netflix at the end of a long workday, no scented candles to ease stress, no over-the-counter ibuprofen when a headache settled in. The city demanded everything from its people. Long hours in factories, crowded tenements with thin walls, and endless worry about money, health, and survival. And in the middle of all this hardship, people turned to their bottles and powders and tinctures, drugs, tonics, elixirs, whatever word you wanted to use. For the Victorians, it wasn't rebellion, it wasn't counterculture, it was survival. The smells of the city told you as much as the sights. Coal smoke burned your throat, open sewers stank in the alleys. But then you'd catch other scents, too, the sharpness of pipe tobacco drifting from a pub, the bitter tang of gin splashed into mugs, the strange sweetness of laudanum clinging to the lips of someone who swore it kept their headaches away. Imagine walking past a neighbor's window and seeing a mother tip a few drops of soothing syrup into her baby's bottle. Nobody called it dangerous. To them, it was just one of those household tricks everyone knew. And really, that's what made this world so strange. There wasn't the strict line we have today between medicine and vice. A chemist's shop in 1850s London wasn't just a place for bandages and cough drops. It was a carnival of bottles, each with brightly painted labels promising to fix whatever ailed you. Nervous complaints, here's a cordial. Stomach upset, try this tonic. Melancholy, a dash of wine mixed with coca leaves should do the trick. Some bottles really helped. Others were snake oil with a dangerous kick. And yet, people lined up because what other choice did they have? Doctors were expensive, hospitals were terrifying, and life didn't pause just because you were hurting. Everywhere you looked, the stress of city living showed on people's faces. Mothers carrying too many children, fathers stumbling home late from work, old men coughing in doorways, young girls with pale cheeks and thin arms. And still, life had to keep going. Someone had to sweep the chimney, mend the clothes, light the lamps, and sell the newspapers. That constant grind created a hunger for relief. Something quick, cheap, and easy. And that's exactly what these little bottles and powders promised. Now, don't imagine this as some seedy underground trade. This wasn't back alley deals or whispers behind closed doors. The drug use of the Victorian era was right out in the open. Advertisements for soothing syrups, liver tonics, and invigorating drops were splashed across newspapers and pasted on street corners. A mother might proudly display her family's favorite brand on the mantle. A gentleman might openly recommend his preferred cordial to a friend over dinner. The very things we now consider poisons were seen then as signs of progress, proof that science was working its magic in everyday life. It's easy for us to laugh now at some of the choices. Arsenic wafers for clear skin, mercury pills for constipation, morphine for fussy babies. But when you put yourself in their shoes, it makes a kind of sense. Imagine the constant pressure of surviving in a city that never really gave you a break. You'd grab whatever relief you could too. And for the Victorians, these remedies were as normal as coffee or aspirin is for us today. The city's rhythm added to the dependence. Mornings meant waking up in cramped, cold rooms where frost might creep along the inside of the windows. Workers bundled themselves against the damp air and trudged off into the fog, their breath mixing with the smoke of early factory fires. Children hurried through the streets selling papers or carrying water buckets, eyes already tired. By afternoon, fatigue weighed heavy. That's when the tonics came out, little pick-me-ups to keep you moving until evening. And nights. Nights were their own story. Pubs alive with gin, sitting rooms lit with glowing absinthe glasses, quiet bedrooms where mothers slipped drops of laudanum into their tea before finally resting. This wasn't just London either. Across Britain, from the factories of Manchester to the quiet country towns, drugs were woven into daily routines. Farmers battling rheumatism sipped from their bottles, clerks with nervous jitters leaned on nerve tonics. Young men with artistic dreams swore by their green fairy in a glass. It wasn't just addiction, it was culture. And yet, beneath the surface, you can sense the tension. People whispered about neighbours who overdid it. They worried quietly about the pale children who never seemed to wake up quite right after a spoonful of syrup. They noticed the artists who shone brightly for a season, then dimmed too soon. The Victorians lived in a time of immense progress, yes, railways, factories, telegraphs, but also immense misery. And their dependence on these strange remedies was both a symptom and a solution. It's hard not to see the parallels with today. We shake our heads at bottles of opium-laced tonics, but we understand the craving for escape, the desire to quiet a restless mind, the need to make it through just one more day. Their world was harsher, dirtier, more desperate, but the feeling underneath is familiar. The Victorians just had different bottles to reach for. So, here we are at the beginning of our journey, standing on the cobblestones of a city that never truly sleeps. The fog is thick. The gas lamps flicker. The people hurry by with their secrets tucked in pockets and purses. We're about to walk through their world, drug by drug, story by story, and see what really kept Victorian Britain moving. Not just survival, but escape. Not just pain relief, but dreams in a bottle. And it all starts with that most famous of Victorian companions, the little brown bottle of laudanum. It's early morning in London, the kind of morning that feels more like a hangover than a fresh start. The sky is heavy with fog and soot. Gas lamps flicker like tired eyes, and the streets echo with the clatter of hooves as milk carts and delivery wagons rattle past. Inside a cramped townhouse, the day begins not with bacon sizzling or a pot of coffee perking, but with something much stronger, far stranger, and completely ordinary for the time: a few drops of laudanum. That little brown bottle sits on the mantel, right next to the family Bible, and in a way it's treated with the same kind of reverence. Because here in Victorian Britain, laudanum isn't just medicine, it's comfort, it's ritual, it's survival. Laudanum was a simple, almost innocent-looking mixture, opium dissolved in alcohol. Nothing fancy about it, no mysterious label, just a straightforward liquid that promised to take away pain, calm the nerves, and maybe, if you were lucky, smooth out the edges of a life that was anything but smooth. Doctors loved it. Parents loved it. Writers loved it. The rich, the poor, men, women. Everybody found a use for laudanum. Imagine yourself sitting at the breakfast table. The wallpaper is peeling. The bread is stale. The tea is weak. There's the faint smell of coal smoke creeping in from the street. And right there in the middle of the table is that bottle, its cork slightly worn from constant use. A few drops go into your cup. Maybe a dash into the baby's milk, if he won't stop crying. Some families even stirred it into soup. The taste, bitter, harsh, something like regret soaked in cherry. But that didn't matter. What mattered was how quickly the world softened after you swallowed it. For a few minutes, the cough that kept you awake half the night fades away. The constant gnawing pain in your back quiets down. The weight pressing on your chest, whether from sickness, grief, or just the endless grind of another day, loosens just a little. It wasn't joy laudanum gave. It was distance. Enough distance to keep going. Doctors prescribed it for nearly everything. Toothaches, headaches, rheumatism, woman's troubles, sleepless nights, melancholy, nerves. The so-called nervous complaint, which could mean anything from anxiety to exhaustion, found its cure in those drops. And once you started taking it, you didn't want to stop. Not because you felt wild or euphoric, Laudanum didn't do that, but because life without it felt too sharp, too loud, too heavy. And here's the thing, laudanum wasn't just for the sick. It was for everyone. Your neighbour swore by it for her binions. Your aunt claimed it soothed her delicate nerves. Your uncle took it after a hard day at the dockyard. Even poets and novelists leaned on it, sometimes a little too heavily. Percy Shelley, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Charles Dickens. All were familiar with its effects. And one man, Thomas de Quincey, even wrote a whole book about it, Confessions of an English Opium Eater. He described how it gave him visions, dreams more vivid than life itself. He also described the nightmares, the hallucinations, the way reality blurred until you couldn't quite tell where the dream ended and the day began. It was cheap too. That made it even more irresistible. A bottle cost just a few pence, cheaper than gin, cheaper than wine, and far easier to get. No prescription. No questions. Just step into the chemist's shop, lay a coin on the counter, and walk out with your cure in hand. Rich or poor, everyone could afford laudanum. It was the most democratic drug of the age. Of course, the way society saw it depended a lot on who you were. If you were a working-class mother slipping laudanum into your tea to forget about the rent, people called it masseuse. If you were a wealthy lady of leisure taking it for delicate nerves, it was just a charming habit. One was seen as shameful, the other as eccentric. That hypocrisy defined so much of Victorian life. And what about the side effects? They didn't really talk about those. Sure, sometimes you'd lose hours staring out the same window, hypnotized by the way the fog curled around a lamppost. Or maybe you'd try to read a page of a penny dreadful, only to realize you'd been stuck on the same paragraph for 3 hours. But wasn't that better than coughing yourself to death, or listening to your toddler scream for the 3rd night in a row? Addiction was brushed off as habit. Overdose was whispered about but rarely admitted. As long as the bottle was there, people didn't ask too many questions. It's easy to imagine how quickly it became a rhythm. Wake up, tea with laudanum, head out into the fog. The world feels just a little softer, just a little more bearable. By midday, when the fog mixes with factory smoke and your stomach is empty, another dose keeps you moving. At night, when the walls close in and the street noise won't stop, one more drop sends you drifting off. It was the coffee, the aspirin, the sleeping pill, and the anti-anxiety prescription of its time, all rolled into one bitter brown liquid. And in its own way, it defined the mood of the era. The Victorians prided themselves on progress, invention, expansion. The railways spread across the land, telegraph wires stitched the world together. Factories roared, cities grew, and the empire stretched across continents. But underneath all that noise and progress was exhaustion, anxiety, pain. And laudanum was the quiet companion that let people keep up the pace, even as it slowly hollowed them out. Picture that bottle again, sitting on the mantel, next to the Bible, next to the clock, both sacred and ordinary. It was comfort. It was relief. It was also a slow, steady trap. But in a world with so few options, it was the one thing almost every family trusted. So as we linger here at the breakfast table, sipping bitter tea laced with something far stronger, you start to understand why laudanum was everywhere. Not because people were chasing pleasure, but because they were trying to get through another day in a world that asked too much of them. And laudanum was just the beginning. If you step outside now into the foggy London streets, you'll hear whispers about another kind of escape. Not drops in a teacup, but smoke drifting in the shadows of East End cellars. Places where time disappeared and dreams floated through the air. The streets grow darker as you make your way east, deeper into the maze of London's alleys. Gas lamps flicker weakly through the fog, throwing more shadow than light. The air is heavy with the smell of coal smoke, fried fish, damp wool, and too many people packed into too little space. Somewhere a baby cries, somewhere else a man curses in the gutter. You keep walking, past the narrow shop fronts, past the dripping walls, until you reach a battered wooden door with curtains drawn tight across its windows. The noise of the street fades as you slip inside. The room is dim, hazy, and thick enough to chew. A mixture of lamp oil, incense, and something darker, sharper opium hangs in the air. Your shoes stick to the floor as you walk. The wallpaper is stained, peeling in long curls, and the ceiling sags low over your head. Every surface looks as though it's been soaking in smoke for decades. The place is a cross between a living room gone wrong and a chemistry experiment that never ended. Welcome to a Victorian opium den. The regulars are already here, stretched out on couches and benches that look like they've been borrowed from better days. Some mutter softly, others drool, eyes half closed, floating somewhere between waking and dreaming. A man with a long beard stares into nothing, lips moving like he's talking to someone only he can see. In the corner, an artist hums to himself while sketching the same 3 crooked lines over and over on a napkin. You weave past them and sink into a patched velvet sofa, the kind that's been worn flat by countless dreamers before you. Someone passes you a long, delicate pipe, sticky, ornate. Its brass fittings shine dully in the lamplight. The ritual begins. Sliver of opium is heated over a candle, soft and sticky as it bubbles. The smoke curls upward, grey and sweet. You inhale slowly, cautiously, and the first taste is bitter, like medicine, like tar. But then it melts into something deeper. A numbness, a warmth that seeps into your bones. Your lungs fill with fog, and suddenly the weight you've been carrying, rent, sickness, hunger, slides off your shoulders. The city outside grows distant. A haze spreads quickly. Every sound becomes a muffled echo. Every worry floats away. Even the scratchy wool of your shirt feels softer against your skin. A group of strangers nearby share the silence. Their faces slack, their bodies slumped. No one here cares about pedigrees or politics. No one here asks about work or family. Conversation drifts in broken pieces. Half-formed sentences, murmurs, the clink of glass, the hiss of a match. Then it dissolves again into quiet. Time loses its grip. Minutes stretch, collapse, bend. You think you've been here an hour, maybe 3. It doesn't matter. A gentle fog wraps around your mind, carrying half-dreams with it. A woman in the corner giggles softly at something only she can see. A young man, probably a clerk by the look of his jacket, lies back with his eyes closed, his lips forming silent prayers or poetry. You don't know which. The denkeeper glides silently through the haze, his steps practiced, his eyes sharp despite the gloom. He replenishes pipes, collects coins, and makes sure no one sets themselves, or the sofa, on fire. He's a shadow in the background, neither kind nor cruel, just there, like the walls themselves. He knows everyone here. He knows who can pay, who can't, and who needs to be nudged awake before they forget to leave at all. And then the visions come. Not full-blown hallucinations, maybe, but fragments. The gaslight bends into strange shapes, glowing green and gold. Patterns shimmer in the smoke. For some, there are grand dreamscapes. Whole cities built in the mind, music that never existed, colours that no painter could ever mix. For others, just peace, sleep without guilt, rest without interruption. Of course, it's not all pleasant. Sometimes the fog turns heavy, pressing on the chest. Sometimes shadows feel too close, faces too strange. You remember stories about nightmares, dreams that stretch too far, where people wake screaming, unable to shake off the images. But you push those thoughts away. For now, it's enough just to float. Opium dens were never glamorous, though writers loved to paint them that way. In books and newspapers, they became dens of mystery, exotic danger, places where respectability crumbled. In truth, most were just like this: smoky rooms, battered furniture, people chasing a little relief. The papers called them foreign, corrupting, a threat brought in by Chinese immigrants. But the truth was simpler. Londoners were here because they wanted to be, because their lives were too hard, too sharp, too exhausting, because they needed somewhere to forget. When you finally stagger back into the street, the fog feels thicker, the city quieter. Your wallet is lighter. Your clothes stink of smoke. You vow never to return, but you know you will. Tomorrow, the factories will roar again, the debts will pile up, The landlord will bang at the door, and the city will not care. And when that weight presses down, the memory of this haze, this quiet, this floating dream, will call you back. That was the strange promise of the opium den. Not happiness, not joy, just escape. And as you walk home through the mist, you wonder if this is what adults reach for. What about parents with screaming babies at night? What do they give their children when nothing else will calm them down? That's where we're headed next, into the quiet world of soothing syrups, bottles filled with morphine and hope, marketed as miracles for restless little ones. It's late evening now. The gas lamps outside flicker weakly against the fog, and the city hum has dulled to a muffled background of cartwheels and distant shouts. Inside a narrow townhouse, though, the noise is anything but distant. A baby cries. High-pitched, relentless. The kind of crying that rattles through thin walls, seeps under doors, and scrapes against every tired nerve in the house. The mother rocks the child, humming softly, her voice fraying with exhaustion. The father paces, trying not to snap. The older siblings press pillows over their ears. And then, with a sigh that carries both guilt and relief, the mother reaches for a bottle. The label is simple Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. It looks harmless enough. A small, clear glass bottle, the liquid inside faintly sweet-smelling, herbal. The ads promised miracles. Relief from teething pain, a cure for colic, a guaranteed calm for even the crankiest child. The advertisements showed rosy-cheeked babies sleeping like angels, mothers smiling serenely, homes filled with peace. And for pennies a bottle, who could resist? The truth, though, was written not on the label but in the formula morphine mixed with alcohol, a combination strong enough to sedate almost anyone. For infants and toddlers, it was knockout power in a spoon. Picture the scene: the mother measures a teaspoon, maybe two. She ignores the voice in her head that wonders if this is too much, because the label insists it's safe. The liquid touches the baby's lips, and within minutes, the wails soften. The little body relaxes, the eyelids grow heavy. Finally, the crying stops. For the first time all night, the house is quiet. The parents breathe again. The siblings settle into their beds. The father lowers himself into his chair, shoulders sagging with relief. The mother wipes her eyes and whispers, "Thank God." Not because she doesn't love her child, but because love doesn't cancel exhaustion. Because in a world without disposable diapers, without pacifiers, without pediatricians who could be trusted, sometimes survival meant silence at any cost. And so the syrup spread, house to house, street to street. Mothers recommended it to neighbors. Grandmothers swore by it. Doctors, pharmacists, even midwives sold it, prescribed it, encouraged it. No one asked too many questions. Why would they? It worked. But beneath that peace was a darker truth. Some infants never woke up. Some grew quiet in ways that were too quiet, their little bodies overwhelmed by the very syrup that soothed them. Even those who survived might wake groggy, their tiny systems already growing used to the drug. Addiction didn't wait for adulthood. For some, it began in the cradle. And yet, what choice did parents have? Imagine yourself in that cramped London room. Coal dust clings to the curtains. The baby has been screaming for 3 nights straight. You've tried everything: rocking, singing, praying. The neighbors bang on the wall, muttering curses. The landlord threatens eviction. The stress is unbearable. And then, there on the shelf, is a bottle promising peace. Wouldn't you reach for it? The advertisements didn't help. They were everywhere. Trade cards and posters showed smiling babies, angelic in their sleep. Taglines promised quiet nights and gentle relief. Mothers were told they were being caring, responsible, modern. The syrup wasn't sold as a vice, it was sold as progress. Science in a bottle. It's hard to blame those parents. They didn't have the warnings we do. No regulations. No ingredient lists. No doctors telling them the risks. All they had was a crying child, an empty purse, and a world that offered no breaks. The story of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup is heartbreaking, yes, but it's also deeply human. It wasn't about recklessness. It was about desperation. about trying to find rest in a life that gave so little of it. And so, in countless homes across Britain and America, babies drifted into morphine-laced slumber. Parents slept, families carried on, and history recorded yet another strange chapter in the long, complicated relationship between medicine, survival, and trust. The syrup would eventually be condemned, of course. By the early 1900s, as more and more deaths were linked to it, the cries for reform grew louder. Laws were passed. Labels became stricter. Mrs. Winslow's would eventually vanish from shelves. But by then, it had already left its mark on families, on children, on the very idea of what medicine should be. Now, as you step back from that quiet Victorian bedroom, where a baby finally sleeps, and a mother finally exhales, you realize something important. This era wasn't just about escape for adults. It was about control, about trying to manage life, no matter the cost. And sometimes, the price was far higher than anyone could have imagined. And outside, in the foggy streets of London, another story is waiting. A different kind of miracle drug, one that didn't just promise peace but energy, brilliance and confidence. A powder that numbed toothaches, banished fatigue, and made even the dullest dinner party bearable. It was the rising star of the late Victorian age. Cocaine. The year is 1890. London hums with restless energy, its streets louder and busier than ever. Carriages rattle by, factory whistles pierce the air, and crowds shuffle past with wary determination. Progress is everywhere. Railways stretching further, telegraphs snapping faster, inventions appearing in shop windows like magic tricks. But progress came with pressure. People needed to work harder, move faster, keep up. And into this already overstimulated world came a new miracle, a powdery promise that seemed almost too good to be true: cocaine. For Victorians, cocaine wasn't the taboo we imagine today. It was cutting-edge science, the latest wonder from the world of chemistry. Doctors hailed it as revolutionary, especially in surgery. Before cocaine, dental work or eye surgery often meant grim choices: endure agony with a splash of gin and a rag to bite down on, or risk your life with chloroform or ether. But cocaine, a dab on the gums, a touch around the eye, and pain melted away. Patients stayed awake, clear-headed, and most importantly, alive. Dentists adored it. Surgeons praised it. The medical journals were filled with glowing reports of its power, but medicine wasn't the only stage where cocaine performed. Very quickly, it stepped out of the clinic and into everyday life. Imagine walking into your neighborhood chemist, shelves lined with bottles and tins, each promising some relief. You ask for something for a toothache, and the man behind the counter smiles knowingly. He hands you a tiny vial, cocaine toothache drops. Just rub it on the sore spot, he explains, and the pain disappears. And he's right. You dab it on, and your gums go deliciously numb. You can't feel the cavity, can't feel much of anything at all. For a brief, blissful moment, you're not just pain-free, you're floating. From there, cocaine seeped into every corner of Victorian society. Tired? Dab a little on your gums. Nervous about a dinner party? A pinch before you step out the door. Facing a long afternoon of ledgers at the office? A quick spoonful mixed into tonic water, and suddenly you're not just awake, you're brilliant. Advertisements promised it would banish fatigue, cheer the melancholic, and restore vigor. For once, the claims didn't even feel exaggerated. Cocaine really did make people feel unstoppable, at least for a while. It became fashionable too. Not just a medicine, but a mark of sophistication. In Paris, a chemist named Angelo Mariani created a special wine infused with coca leaves. He called it Vin Mariani. The drink was a sensation, smooth Bordeaux blended with the energizing kick of coca. People swore by it. Popes endorsed it. Literally. Pope Leo XIII reportedly carried a flask of the stuff and even awarded Mariani a gold medal for his creation. In London, inventors like Thomas Edison praised it, claiming it fueled their tireless work. Presidents, authors, aristocrats, all seemed to raise a glass of Mariani's concoction and smile a little wider. Even fiction embraced it. Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle's brilliant detective, famously turned to cocaine between cases. For Holmes, the drug wasn't about pleasure. It was about sharpening the mind, filling the empty hours when mysteries weren't knocking at the door. His habit gave him an edge, or so it seemed. But as public opinion slowly shifted, Doyle himself had Holmes abandon the syringe. The drug that had once symbolized brilliance began to look more like a trap. Still, for much of the Victorian age, cocaine carried none of that stigma. It was glamorous, respectable, even admirable. Explorers chewed coca lozenges as they trekked through mountains, claiming it gave them endurance. Doctors prescribed it freely for exhaustion, shyness, female nerves, and anything else that seemed to sap a person's spirit. A teaspoon stirred into a tonic, a lozenge before a climb, a sip of wine before a long day. It all felt like progress bottled up and ready to pour. But of course, the story didn't end with energy and confidence. There were cracks in the glossy surface. Some users noticed they couldn't sleep. Others found themselves jittery, restless, unable to stop talking or moving. Teeth ground down. Hands trembled. Moods swung wildly. At first, these were brushed off as side effects worth tolerating. After all, what was a little insomnia compared to the miracle of pain-free surgery or the joy of banished melancholy? But over time, the darker side became harder to ignore. And then there was the question of who used it. When cocaine was the domain of wealthy doctors, respected writers, and adventurous climbers, it was celebrated. But as it trickled down into poorer neighborhoods, into the hands of people society already looked down upon, the praise shifted to condemnation. The very same powder that was hailed as genius in a doctor's office was called dangerous when smoked or swallowed in a slum. Respectability shaped morality, and once again Victorian hypocrisy showed its face. Still, the fascination lingered. Imagine yourself in a parlor, the wallpaper patterned with flowers, the fire crackling in the grate. Guests chatter, teacups clink, and someone passes around a little vial. Just a pinch on the gums. Just a taste. The mood lifts. Conversation sparks. Suddenly everyone is brighter, quicker, funnier. For a while, the evening feels enchanted, and when it wears off, well, you could always take a little more. That's what made cocaine so powerful and so dangerous. It didn't just dull pain, it lit people up. It made them feel capable of anything. And in a world that demanded more and more, it was easy to keep reaching for that feeling. By the early 1900s, the tide began to turn. Newspapers warned of addiction. Laws crept in to restrict its sale. Cocaine went from miracle to menace, from fashionable to forbidden. But in those last decades of the Victorian age, it shone like a star, dazzling everyone who came near. It was the energy of an empire bottled in a vial. And yet, it wasn't the only way Victorians sought escape. There were other parties, other potions, other rituals. Some far stranger, some far more theatrical. Picture a handkerchief soaked in ether, passed around at a party, giggles erupting as the room spins. Picture a glowing glass of green absinthe in a Paris bar, poets swearing the green fairy. Whispered inspiration in their ears. Because if laudanum was about softening the edges, and cocaine was about lighting a fire, then ether and absinthe were about losing yourself completely, laughing, hallucinating, tumbling into something strange and otherworldly. The evening is young. A soft drizzle taps against the window panes, gaslight flickers outside in the fog, and inside a townhouse parlor, a group of well-dressed guests sit stiffly in high-backed chairs. The punch bowl is nearly empty. The piano has been played out of tune. Conversation drags. One man drones on about railway timetables. Another is halfway through retelling a story he told last week. The hostess, a woman with diamonds in her hair and boredom in her eyes, glances toward the conservatory. There, hidden among the ferns, sits the night's true entertainment, a glass bottle of ether. Officially, ether was a medical marvel. Surgeons adored it. A few drops on a cloth, and a patient could slip into painless sleep while a knife did its work. Compared to the brutal days of sawing through bone while men screamed and thrashed, ether felt like a gift from heaven, but in the wrong setting, or maybe the right one, it became something else entirely. A party trick, a secret thrill, a way to turn a dull evening into chaos. Someone produces a lace handkerchief. A few drops of ether soak into the cloth, sharp and sweet-smelling, and then, with a grin, the handkerchief is passed around. One brave guest inhales, just a little, and suddenly their knees wobble. A giggle escapes, then another, until they collapse onto a fainting couch, eyes watering, laughing helplessly. The room erupts in gasps, laughter, and nervous whispers. The ether is passed again, and one by one, the stiffness melts away. The respectable gathering turns into a blur of dizziness, giggles, and slurred songs. For a few minutes, everything is hilarious. The flowers in the centerpiece seem to whisper secrets. The wallpaper patterns shimmer and shift. A man swears the piano is humming on its own. Someone insists the hostess's hat has floated half an inch above her head. The air grows heavy with perfume, laughter, and the unmistakable sharpness of ether. It is absurd, reckless, and thrilling. Of course, the aftermath is less glamorous. Guests slump into chairs, dizzy and pale. Someone faints dramatically into the shrubbery outside. One man wakes up on the floor with his waistcoat buttoned wrong and no memory of how it happened. But for those few moments, ether turns boredom into something unforgettable. It wasn't just parlours, though. Students discovered ether too, turning dull university evenings into contests of who could inhale the most before collapsing in a heap. Medical apprentices who should have been studying anatomy instead chased each other through labs with bottles of the stuff. Even weddings, funerals, and family gatherings were not entirely safe from the lure of a little bottle hidden in someone's pocket. But if ether was about silliness and laughter, absinthe was about mystery and dreams. Picture yourself in a different setting now. Not an English parlour, but a dimly lit cafe in Paris. The air buzzing with talk, the tables crowded with poets, painters, and philosophers. A green glass glows faintly in the lamplight. It is absinthe, the infamous green fairy. The ritual is half the magic. The bartender sets a glass before you filled with that strange emerald liquid. He balances a slotted spoon on the rim, places a sugar cube on top, and drizzles cold water slowly, drop by drop, until the drink clouds into a milky swirl. The table falls silent as everyone watches. Then, with a quiet toast, you take your first sip. The taste is sharp, herbal, almost medicinal, licorice and bitterness, laced with something wilder. It burns, then warms. A shiver runs down your spine, and suddenly the world feels a little less heavy. The shadows soften. The conversation around you grows louder, stranger, more daring. Someone begins to sketch furiously on a napkin, convinced they're capturing eternity. Another poet recites half-finished verses to a chair that seems to be listening. Laughter erupts, then silence, then laughter again. Was it the wormwood in the drink that gave absinthe its reputation for visions? Or was it just very strong alcohol dressed up in ritual? To the poets and painters, it didn't matter. Absinthe was the key to creativity, to genius, to touching the divine. Van Gogh, Toulouse-Lautrec, countless others swore by it. They called it their muse, their fairy, their spark. And yet, like ether, it had its darker side. Too many glasses and inspiration gave way to confusion. Dreams turned to nightmares. People staggered home, convinced the shadows whispered, only to wake with pounding heads and trembling hands. Still, the legend of the green fairy endured, whispered about in cafes and painted in glowing green advertisements. What made both ether and absinthe so irresistible wasn't just the effects. It was the ritual, the secrecy, the sense of stepping away from ordinary life, if only for a little while. In a society bound by rules and etiquette, where every gesture was judged and every emotion controlled, these drinks and vapours offered something rarer: freedom. For the upper classes, it was rebellion dressed in silk. For students, it was a dare. For artists, it was a muse. For the lonely, it was a way to belong. Everyone had their reasons, and everyone told themselves their reasons were better than anyone else's. And so, as night deepened in parlours and cafes, bottles were opened, handkerchiefs passed, sugar cubes dissolved, and laughter, visions, and blurred dreams filled the spaces where silence had reigned. But not all escapes were playful. Some were darker, heavier, tied not to creativity or fun, but to sheer survival. Because while either an absinthe had drifted through salons and bars, another drink had sunk deeper roots in the streets and alleys of Britain. Cheap, sharp, and everywhere, it was the comfort and curse of the poor. The fog has thickened. The lamps outside glow like pale coins in the mist, and the streets of London feel damp to the bone. It's the kind of evening when your boots never dry, when the cold seems to seep under your skin and settle in your chest. You're tired, hungry, and the world feels heavy. And then, just around the corner, you see the familiar glow of a gin shop. You step inside, and the world changes. The air is thick, warmer than outside, scented with sweat, damp wool, and the sharp tang of spirits. The floorboards creak underfoot, sticky in places. The chatter is loud, a mixture of laughter, arguments, and the kind of singing that barely remembers the tune. Behind the counter, a barkeep sloshes gin into chipped glasses without bothering to measure. One look at your face, and he doesn't ask questions. He just pours. This is gin. The people's drink, the fuel of London's working class. A liquid escape that promised to dull hunger, soften sorrow, and blur the sharp edges of life, if only for a while. By the Victorian era, gin had earned its infamous nickname Mother's Ruin. But to millions of people living hard, grinding lives, it was survival in a glass. Think about what those lives were like. 12-hour days in factories thick with soot, children crawling through chimneys, families crammed into one-room flats where privacy was a luxury no one had, rent collectors at the door, landlords demanding payment, debt piling high, wages stretched thin, and all of it under the constant weight of illness. Tuberculosis, cholera, fever. When the world gave you no kindness, gin gave you a few hours of relief. It wasn't glamorous. Nobody pretended it was. A glass of gin burned on the way down, bitter and sharp, like swallowing a pine forest set on fire. But after a few gulps, the body relaxed. The noise of the street faded. The troubles, the aches, the cold, they slipped further away. For a little while, you could laugh, you could sing, you could forget. Mothers drank it to calm their nerves. Fathers drank it to forget the day. Children didn't drink it themselves, but they knew the smell. It clung to breath, to clothes, to every corner of home. It was as much a part of the streets as the fog itself. Of course, it came with its reputation. Gin was blamed for ruined families, lost jobs, broken homes. Cartoons in newspapers showed women slumped over bottles, babies neglected, men stumbling in gutters. Politicians thundered about its dangers. Preachers called it sin in liquid form. And yet, the demand never faded. Because the truth was, gin wasn't the cause of misery. It was the symptom. People didn't drink because their lives were easy. They drank because their lives were unbearable. Inside a gin shop, you'd see every kind of person. A chimney sweep with soot still streaked across his cheeks, a labourer with torn boots and tired eyes, a banker who slipped in after hours, not wanting to be seen, old women with trembling hands, young girls who worked the factories by day and sought warmth by night, even the occasional soldier, trying to drown memories he couldn't shake. Each glass told the same story: life was too hard, and gin was cheaper than hope. There was no ritual, no elegance here, no sugar cubes dissolving on silver spoons, no lace handkerchiefs passed with a wink, just mugs' throats and the pursuit of numbness. People downed gin fast, chasing silence in their heads. Some grew loud and bold, others sat quiet, their faces slack, their thoughts turned inward. Conversations rose and fell like waves. Songs began and dissolved into slurred verses. Arguments broke out, patched over by another round. The barkeep kept pouring. Coins clinked on the counter. The room stayed alive with movement, chatter, and the dull throb of shared exhaustion. It was messy, chaotic, and more than a little heartbreaking. But it was also honest. Gin didn't promise visions or genius. It didn't whisper inspiration or brilliance. It just said, for a while, you won't feel so bad. Morning, of course, told another story. The hangovers were legendary. Heads pounding like hammers, stomachs twisting, mouths dry as dust. People stumbled into the streets, clutching their temples, groaning, swearing never to touch the stuff again. until night came and the cycle began all over. Politicians tried to fight it. They taxed it, regulated it, railed against it. But the demand never died. Where legal gin was too expensive, backstreet stills sprang up, turning potatoes, grains, anything they could find into rough spirits. People would drink whatever they could get, no matter how harsh, no matter how dangerous. Because gin wasn't luxury, it was necessity. And in this way, gin became more than just a drink. It became a mirror, a reflection of the grinding poverty, the endless work, the weight of living in a world where hope was scarce. To outsiders, it was ruin. To those inside, it was the only way to keep going. So when you picture Victorian London, don't just imagine fog and top hats, carriages and grand halls. Imagine these shops tucked into narrow alleys. Imagine the barkeep pouring another glass. Imagine the voices raised in laughter, song, or sorrow. Because gin wasn't just a drink, it was the pulse of the people. And yet, gin was only part of the story. Beyond the shops and the pubs, another industry thrived. Brightly coloured bottles filled chemist shelves, each claiming to cure every ailment under the sun. Some promised relief for nerves, others for digestion, still others for melancholy, gout, or even baldness. Their labels were loud, their promises louder, and their ingredients, well, those were best left unmentioned. It was the world of patent medicine. The gas lamps glow brighter now, and the streets are slick with mist. You wander past the pub, past the grocer's, and finally stop outside a shop with tall windows full of bottles. Some clear, some green, some blue, all gleaming in the light like jewels. This is the neighborhood chemist, and stepping inside is like stepping into a carnival of promises. The bell above the door jingles as you enter. The air smells of camphor, licorice, and something sharp you can't quite place. Shelves line the walls from floor to ceiling, each one crammed with bottles, tins, jars, and boxes. Their labels call out to you in bold fonts and colourful designs: invincible elixir, miracle drops, nerve restorer, vitalizing cordial. Each promises relief, energy, beauty, and sometimes even eternal youth. Welcome to the world of Victorian patent medicine. The term patent medicine is misleading, of course. Most of these concoctions weren't patented at all. They were trademarked, branded, and advertised with gusto, but the recipes were secret. And that was the point. You weren't buying medicine, you were buying hope. Bottled, labelled, and sold with a smile. Take one down from the shelf. The glass is cool in your hand, the liquid inside glowing faintly in the gaslight. The label is decorated with cherubs and banners. It claims to cure headaches, stomach aches, melancholy, liver complaints, gout, and general malaise. That last one is particularly useful since in the Victorian world, general malaise was basically code for being alive. The truth, of course, is a different story. Most of these bottles are filled with a cheerful mix of sugar, alcohol and herbs. Some have opium. Some have cocaine. Others contain strychnine, yes, the same poison you'd use to kill rats, advertised as a stimulating tonic. Mercury shows up too, prescribed for everything from constipation to syphilis. It's dangerous, even deadly, but the labels don't say that. They say things like invigorates the humours and restores lost vitality, and people, desperate for relief, believe it. Imagine you've been working long hours, your back aches, your nerves are shot, and your stomach feels twisted. You step into the chemist's shop, coin in hand, and place your trust in the colourful bottle the man behind the counter recommends. No prescription needed, no warning labels, just faith. You take it home, uncork it, and pour a spoonful into your mouth. The taste is bitter, herbal, with a hint of alcohol that burns all the way down. 10 minutes later, you feel lighter, your stomach eases, your nerves calm. You think, it works! And maybe it does. Or maybe you're just drunk. Patent medicine was a business, and business was booming. The advertising was relentless. Posters plastered on lampposts, full-page ads in penny papers, testimonials printed with smiling faces claiming miraculous recoveries. I took Dr. Wormwood's restorative cordial, and my gout vanished! My sciatica disappeared! Even my fear of Mondays is gone! Who wouldn't want to believe? Every respectable Victorian household had a shelf or cabinet with bottles like these. One for headaches, one for female complaints, one for digestion, and one mysterious bottle inherited from an aunt, its label half rubbed away, glowing faintly in the dark. Children got a spoonful for coughs, women for nerves, men for energy. Everyone had a favorite brand. But here's the thing, most people knew, deep down, that these bottles were a gamble. Sometimes they helped, sometimes they didn't, sometimes they made things worse. And yet, people kept buying them. Because buying them wasn't just about health. It was about hope. Hope that tomorrow would hurt less. Hope that fatigue could be lifted. Hope that a few drops could solve problems too heavy to name. The chemist himself was part showman, part shopkeeper. His moustache might be waxed to perfection, his coat dusted with chalk from the bottles he handled. He knew his customers by name. He'd listen to their complaints, nod sympathetically, and then sweep his arm toward the shelves like a magician revealing his tricks. For your nerves, madame, I recommend Dr. Splendid's marvelous drops. For your gout, sir, nothing beats Bicknell's invincible elixir. And for the little ones, a spoon of Mrs. Winslow's, guaranteed peace and quiet. And the people would buy, because what else could they do? Doctors were expensive, hospitals were terrifying, and pain didn't wait for payday. Sometimes the side effects were obvious: tingling hands, blurred vision, a rash you didn't want to describe. Sometimes they were subtle: fatigue that never lifted, dependence that crept in unnoticed. But rarely did anyone admit the cure might be worse than the disease. If it didn't work, you blamed your constitution, not the bottle. And if it really didn't work, well, there was always another bottle to try. It's easy to laugh now at the absurd claims.
Cures baldness, restores manly vigor, prevents female hysteria.
But remember, these weren't sold to fools. They were sold to people with no other options, to mothers at their wits' end, to labourers too poor for a doctor, to families desperate for relief. And in a strange way, the medicines did work, not necessarily because of what was in them, but because of the hope they carried. Hope can be powerful, even when mixed with sugar, alcohol, and poison. Patent medicine became more than just a business. It became a culture. Collectible trade cards featured happy babies and angelic mothers. Colourful tins and bottles turned into keepsakes, displayed proudly in homes. It was advertising before the golden age of advertising, a masterclass in selling not the product but the dream. But dreams fade. By the turn of the 20th century, scandals piled up. Stories of poisonings, deaths, and shattered families forced governments to act. Laws were passed, requiring labels, banning dangerous ingredients, regulating what could and couldn't be sold. The golden age of patent medicine came to an end, but its legacy lingered. Many of today's pharmaceuticals began as patent medicines. Some of the biggest drug companies in the world trace their roots back to those crowded shelves in Victorian chemist shops. Step back out into the street now. The fog swirls, the city hums, and you realize something important. The Victorians weren't foolish. They were desperate. They weren't gullible. They were hopeful. And hope, in any age, sells better than anything else. Still, not all remedies came in bottles. Some were powders, some were pills, some were deadly little wafers that promised beauty at a terrible price. Because in Victorian Britain, appearance mattered just as much as health, and people were willing to risk everything, even their lives, for the glow of pale, perfect skin. Next, we enter the strange, dangerous world of arsenic wafers and lead powders, where vanity and poison went hand in hand. The fog outside has thinned, and the gas lamps glow steady now, their light pooling across polished shop windows. Tonight, we step not into a chemist or a pub, but into the boudoir of a fashionable Victorian lady preparing for an evening at the ball. Her maid hovers nearby, holding a tiny decorative tin. Inside are thin, pale wafers, harmless looking, almost like communion bread. But they are something else entirely. They are arsenic wafers. In the Victorian age, pale skin wasn't just a preference. It was a declaration, a glowing, ghostly white complexion told the world you were wealthy enough to avoid manual labor, that you hadn't spent long hours in the sun. Farmers and field workers had tans, nobility had porcelain skin, and for women especially, the pressure was immense. A pale face could open doors, seal marriages, and define your place in society. So, when beauty books and advertisements whispered about a new secret, a wafer that could smooth the skin, erase blemishes, and leave behind a radiant glow, people listened. The secret, of course, was arsenic. A poison, but in small doses, it was marketed as harmless, even healthy. Picture the scene. The lady sits at her vanity, candles flickering, hair pinned high, dress laid out for the evening. She takes one of the wafers between her fingers, hesitates just a moment, then places it on her tongue. It dissolves, faintly bitter, leaving behind the sharp tang of danger disguised as elegance. She glances in the mirror, expecting nothing immediate. The glow would come slowly, over days, weeks, months. Pale skin, smooth cheeks, a beauty that looked effortless, but carried a hidden cost. It wasn't just women either. Men, too, dabbled in arsenic talcs and complexion powders. The ideal wasn't rugged health. It was refinement, delicacy, the look of someone untouched by hard labor. Arsenic promised that, even as it quietly damaged the body from within, tingling fingers, stomach pains, hair falling out, but beauty excused it all. And arsenic was only one piece of the Victorian beauty arsenal. Lead-based powders were dusted across faces to brighten complexions. Mercury creams were rubbed on freckles, believed to banish spots and all-prove. The skin, belladonna drops, made from deadly nightshade, were dripped into the eyes to dilate pupils, creating a wide-eyed, doe-like look that was considered irresistibly beautiful. The name, belladonna, even meant beautiful woman. Never mind the fact that it could cause blindness if used too long. Step into a ballroom and you'd see the results. Pale faces glowing in the gaslight, eyes shining with an unnatural brightness, lips dusted with subtle tints. From a distance, the crowd looked elegant, ethereal, like porcelain dolls drifting across polished floors. Up close, though, the effect was more haunting. Cheeks a little too pale, eyes just a little too wide, hands trembling from the side effects of the very potions that created the look. Of course, rumors spread. People whispered about fainting spells at dances, about young women collapsing during waltzes. Undertakers supposedly joked they could recognize arsenic users by the greenish tint of their skin. Still, the pressure of fashion drowned out the warnings. Better to glow tonight than worry about tomorrow. It's easy for us now to shake our heads, to say, how could they? But think about it. In a world where appearance could determine your future, where one ball might decide the match that would secure your family's survival, what would you risk? For many Victorians, the answer was everything. Not all beauty tricks were lethal, of course. Some were simply strange. Women carried pomanders, little balls filled with herbs, to ward off bad smells and, supposedly, bad air. Gloves were scented with perfumes to hide the odor of city streets. Hairstyles were stiffened with mixtures that could double as furniture polish. But the dangerous powders and wafers lingered, because they promised the one thing everyone wanted: the illusion of perfection. Behind closed doors, families worried. Friends noticed the changes, but few spoke openly. To question a beauty regimen was to question status itself. And so, the rituals continued, each wafer swallowed with a sip of water, each powder brushed across the skin, each drop of belladonna carefully measured. It is haunting to imagine. A generation of women smiling in candlelight, admired for their beauty, even as their bodies paid the price. Pale skin wasn't just fashion, it was sacrifice. And like so much in Victorian life, it was wrapped in contradiction, elegance built on poison, refinement hiding decay. But not every cure, not every ritual was about beauty. Some were about health, or at least the promise of it, and not all came in a bottle or a wafer. Some Victorians sought relief in places far from the chemist or the vanity table, places filled with steam, with sulfuric waters, even with jolts of electricity. Because when the powders and pills weren't enough, there were other cures waiting. quack cures, spas, and shock machines, each one stranger than the last. It's another grey morning in Victorian London. Coal smoke hangs low over the rooftops, damp fog creeps into every alley, and the city already feels exhausted before the day has even begun. Inside cramped homes, people sip tonics, chew powders, or swallow wafers, each chasing some cure or another. But not all remedies came from a bottle. Some Victorians, worn down by nerves and aches, turned to places where the medicine wasn't swallowed. It was soaked, steamed, or even sparked into you with electricity. Let's start with the Turkish bath. Step through a set of tall doors, and you're greeted by warmth that feels like stepping into another world. The bathhouse is tiled from floor to ceiling, a maze of steam-filled chambers where men and women, stripped of their stiff collars and corsets, come seeking relief. The air smells of eucalyptus and damp stone. Water drips rhythmically from pipes. Attendants, burly and efficient, lead you to a bench and encourage you to sweat it all out. Here, in the haze of steam, social boundaries blur. Nobles and clerks alike sit red-faced and towel-draped, their differences melting with the heat. Conversations drift politics, gossip, the newest scandal from Parliament, or simply complaints about the weather. Some insist the steam opens the pores and draws out sickness. Others claim it revives the spirit, clears the mind, strengthens the will. And maybe it does. Or maybe it just feels good to finally breathe warm, clean air for once, away from the city's smoke and stench. The ritual continues: hotter rooms, hotter benches, until the sweat pours. Then the plunge, an icy pool of cold water that shocks the body awake, making hearts race and lungs gasp. The sensation is so startling, so bracing, that people swear it must be medicinal. Circulation improved. They proclaim, teeth chattering, nerves restored. Even if it's only relief from routine, it's a relief people cling to. And then there were the spy towns. Take a trip to Bath or Harrogate, where the streets are lined with fine hotels and promenades bustling with visitors. Here, the cure isn't steam but water, hot, sulphurous, and faintly metallic. The springs had been famous since Roman times, and Victorians flocked to them with the same faith their ancestors once had. Picture the scene: men and women queue with glasses in hand, waiting to sip the mineral-rich water ladled fresh from the spring. They raise the cups, swallow bravely, and grimace. The taste? Imagine warm pennies steeped in egg water. Bitter, salty, unforgettable. But the attendants assure them this is the taste of healing. The sulphur clears the skin, the minerals strengthen the bones, the warmth soothes the joints. It will cure gout, melancholy, indigestion, heartbreak, whatever troubles you carried here. And then, after drinking, there are the baths. Vast communal pools, tiled in blue and white, filled with steaming mineral water. Men float beside merchants. Ladies dip dainty toes into the shallows. Conversation flows as easily as the water. Who has recovered? Who has worsened? Who has fallen in love during the evening promenade? Because spa towns weren't just about health, they were social stages. You didn't just come to drink the waters. You came to be seen drinking them. Not all cures, though, were so ancient. The Victorians adored electricity, the new, mysterious force that promised to change the world. And if it could light a street lamp, why not cure your nerves? Electrotherapy machines began popping up in private parlours and health clubs. Imagine sitting stiffly in a chair while a contraption of wires, paddles, and dials buzzes beside you. The operator straps electrodes to your arms or legs, turns a crank, and suddenly, zap, a mild current runs through your body. Your fingers twitch, your toes curl, your hair stands on end, and the practitioner, smiling with confidence,
announces there, vitality restored.
For some, the sensation was exhilarating, for others, terrifying. But the advertisements promised miraculous electrotherapy to cure exhaustion, depression, even infertility. Entire companies sprang up selling home kits. Boxes of wires and coils that families could use in the privacy of their own parlours. The instructions were vague, the science shaky, but the appeal undeniable. Electricity was modern. It was powerful. It was the future. And if it made you feel even a little different, tingly, buzzy, alive. That was proof enough. Of course, the quackery didn't end there. Goose fat rubbed on the chest for coughs. Mustard plasters strapped on to draw out illness. Vinegar gargles, onion poultices, camphor-soaked handkerchiefs. Remedies that smelled like kitchens, farms, and pantries. Each one handed down with confidence, each one backed by family tradition, if not medical science. It wasn't always about whether these cures worked. It was about the ritual of trying, sitting in steam until your worries melted, drinking foul-tasting water with the faith it would heal, feeling a spark of electricity dance across your skin, letting grandma smear goose fat on your chest, because that's what her grandmother did. Sometimes the act of doing something, anything, was medicine enough. When you step back into the night, hair damp from steam, lips still tasting faintly of sulfur, fingers tingling from a buzz of electricity, you realize something Victorian cures weren't just about fixing the body. They were about soothing the mind. About reminding people that they weren't powerless, even in a world that often made them feel small. But as strange as these rituals seem, they were only part of the story. Because while some people steamed, soaked, or sparked themselves toward wellness, most still relied on simpler comforts. A pipe, a pinch of snuff, a cigarette rolled by hand, smoke curling into the evening air, mixing with the fog and factory soot. And so, our journey now drifts toward another familiar companion of the Victorian age, tobacco. Step outside into the London night, and the fog isn't just cold dust and damp mist. It's layered with another haze, one chosen and inhaled willingly: tobacco. Pipes, cigars, snuff, hand-rolled cigarettes. All of it weaving through the streets, through the parlours, through every corner of Victorian life. If the era had a scent beyond coal smoke, it was this: the constant, comforting, choking perfume of tobacco. Smoking wasn't a vice back then. It wasn't frowned upon or whispered about. It was normal, expected. A ritual as ordinary as buttoning your waistcoat. The lamplighter carried a pipe tucked behind his ear. The banker strolled down Cheapside with a cigar clenched between his teeth. The factory foreman puffed away while shouting orders above the clatter of machines. Even the street urchins, too young to shave, learned to roll cigarettes from scraps of paper and leftover crumbs of leaf. Everyone smoked. Inside a gentleman's club, after dinner, the ritual was almost sacred. The ladies withdrew to their drawing rooms, and the men gathered in the smoking room. Heavy curtains drawn, leather chairs creaking as men settled in, pipes lit, cigars cut. The air thickened quickly. Conversation turned louder, freer. Politics, philosophy, gossip, all of it carried on clouds of blue-grey smoke curling toward the ceiling. The act of smoking itself was as important as the talk. Packing the pipe, tamping the tobacco, striking the match, each step a small ceremony, a way to slow down, to mark time. Snuff was its own world. Elegant little boxes passed discreetly at dinner parties, polished silver or carved wood, sometimes inlaid with ivory or mother of pearl. A pinch of powdered tobacco lifted to the nose, sniffed with practiced flair, and then the inevitable sneeze, loud and unashamed. It wasn't seen as rude, quite the opposite. It was tradition, almost a mark of refinement. Men competed over the quality of their snuff and the artistry of their boxes. To own a handsome snuff box was to own a little piece of status you could slip into your pocket. Cigarettes were newer, trendier, catching on fast among students, artists, and the fashionable young. Hand-rolled, often loosely packed, they were a bit rebellious, a little bohemian. Picture a smoky garret in Paris or a damp boarding house in London, where aspiring poets sat hunched over scraps of paper, cigarette dangling, ashes dropping onto manuscripts. Cigarettes carried a whiff of the exotic, Turkish blends, foreign leaves, sophistication in a slim roll of paper. For women, smoking in public was still scandalous. Respectable ladies didn't puff pipes in the street, but behind greenhouse doors, in private salons, and sometimes at late-night gatherings, the rules bent. A few daring women tried cigarettes, laughed through the smoke, and felt modern, even dangerous. There were whispered stories of bonnets catching fire when someone struck a careless match too close to a ribbon. A hazard? Yes, but part of the thrill. And what of the home? Imagine a parlour in the evening, children asleep upstairs, coal fire glowing faintly in the grate. Father sits in his chair, pipe glowing, the smoke mingling with furniture polish, and the faint odour of boiled onions from supper. It isn't glamorous, but it is ordinary, comforting. A pipe meant the day was over, that for a little while at least, the world could slow down. Nobody spoke of them. Consumption, what we now know as tuberculosis, ravaged families, but it was blamed on drafts, poor air, or weak constitutions, never on smoking. A cough was just a cough, and if it grew worse, well, you might soothe it with an opium-laced cough drop anyway. The haze in the lungs was as much a part of life as the haze in the streets. The advertisements were bold and cheerful. Tobacco invigorated the mind, they claimed. It calmed the nerves, soothed the throat, and was recommended by bishops, generals, and gentlemen of distinction. There was no stigma, no warning, only reassurance that a smoke was good for you. Doctors smoked, teachers smoked, even vicars smoked, sometimes with a discreet pipe hidden behind the church. And there was camaraderie in it, passing a cigar after a meal, offering a pinch of snuff at a lecture, lighting another man's pipe from your own. Tobacco bound people together. A shared ritual, a shared indulgence. In a world that was rigid and stratified, smoking was a small bridge between classes. The banker and the bootmaker might never dine at the same table, but they could share a pipe outside a pub. Of course, moderation was not a Victorian strength. Rooms grew so thick with smoke that curtains yellowed, wallpaper dulled, and lungs wheezed. Children grew up coughing, their hair and clothes steeped in the smell, but no one seemed to mind. Smoking wasn't a problem, it was simply part of life. Picture a busy London street. The air is already heavy with coal soot, but layered over it is the sweet, sharp tang of tobacco. Men hunch against the cold, pipes glowing like fireflies in the mist. Cigarette smoke drifts from alleys. A gentleman taps ash from his cigar while hailing a cab. The city inhales and exhales in rhythm with its people. By the time the lamps are dimmed and doors bolted for the night, smoke lingers in every room, every coat, every breath. And in that haze, you realize tobacco wasn't just a habit. It was the backdrop of Victorian life. But smoke wasn't the only thing hanging in the air. For those who couldn't quiet their nerves with tobacco, there was another answer waiting on the chemist's shelf, in blue bottles and neat labels. Bromide mixtures, nerve tonics, sedatives for the anxious, the sleepless, the overworked. Bottled con, just a spoonful away. It's the end of another long, restless day in Victorian Britain. The fog has settled thick over the rooftops. The cobblestones glisten with damp, and the sounds of the city have quieted to the occasional rattle of carriage wheels and the bark of a stray dog in the distance. Inside a cramped row house, or a fine Mayfair bedroom, or a boarding house with paper-thin walls, people are facing the same problem. Their nerves won't let them rest. Factory whistles still echo in the mind. Dead scratch at the back of thought. Children's coughs linger from upstairs. For some, it's the weight of endless labour. For others, it's the strange, oppressive silence of a too large home. Whatever the reason, sleep feels far away. And that's where the last of our Victorian bottles comes in: bromides, nerve tonics, sedatives. The final chemical lullaby of the age. Picture a woman sitting by candlelight, lace cap slipping, her hands trembling. On the table before her is a blue glass bottle labelled simply for nerves. She pours a spoonful into water, swirls it slowly, and sips. The taste is salty, faintly metallic, almost chalky. Not pleasant, but within minutes a warmth spreads through her chest. Her mind, buzzing with worries, slows. The edges of thought soften. She exhales. For the first time all day, she feels calm. Bromide mixtures were the safe sedatives of the Victorian age, or so doctors claimed. No dreamy visions like laudanum, no wild energy like cocaine. Just quiet. Doctors recommended them for everything: nervous exhaustion, sleeplessness, agitation, female complaints, even rambunctious children, clerks with shaky hands before exams, housewives overwhelmed by endless chores, vicars too anxious before Sunday sermons. A spoonful for each, and the world would feel manageable again. And then there were nerve tonics. They came in colourful bottles with labels promising to restore vitality and fortify the spirit. Inside, of course, was usually alcohol, maybe a pinch of opium, sometimes quinine or strychnine for pep. The labels boasted secret botanical essences, which usually meant herbs mixed with whatever was swept off the apothecary's floor. But people didn't buy them for the ingredients. They bought them for the hope. That one sip could ease the heart, calm the stomach, and smooth the nerves. Imagine a tea party, polite conversation winding down. A guest sighs, complaining of nerves. Without missing a beat, the hostess reaches for a little cordial, pours it into a glass, and passes it across with a smile. Everyone pretends it's a respectable remedy. Everyone knows it's really just a socially acceptable way to take the edge off. In Victorian Britain, the line between medicine and drink blurred into nothing. The truth, though, was that these bromides and tonics carried their own shadows. Too much bromide, and people grew listless, forgetful, oddly detached. Some wandered through days half dreaming, unable to recall conversations or appointments. Families joked about bromide fog, the way we talk about brain fog today. But behind the jokes was unease, because sometimes the cure made you too calm, too indifferent, too still. Nobody questioned it too much, because everyone was searching for the same thing: relief. A way to silence the noise of life in an age that never seemed to slow down. Step back now and look at the whole picture. Laudanum at the breakfast table, opium pipes in shadowy dens, soothing syrups spooned into babies' mouths, cocaine drops on the gums before a party, either giggles in parlours, absinthe a glowing green in Paris cafes, gin shops bursting with wary laughter, patent medicines lining the shelves, each louder and more colourful than the last. Arsenic wafers dissolving on the tongue in the name of beauty. Turkish baths steaming with gossip, spy towns echoing with sulphur burps. Pipes smoked, snuff sneezed, cigarettes rolled, all filling the air with haze. And at the end of the day, bromides, nerve tonics, and sedatives poured into glasses like liquid sighs. The Victorians lived in a chemical age. Their world was booming with invention, industry, and change. But it was also grinding, exhausting, and relentless. Pain was constant, work was endless. The city pressed in on every side, and so people reached for bottles and powders and potions, not because they were weak or foolish, but because they were human. To us, it all seems reckless, poisonous, absurd, but to them it was medicine, it was comfort, it was survival. And maybe that's the real story here, that beneath all the strange names and bizarre concoctions, the Victorians were doing what we all do, finding ways to get through. To soften the pain, to ease the nerves, to quiet the noise. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it cost them dearly, but always it was about holding on. So as the lamps dim and the city sleeps, picture those bottles lined up on mantels and shelves. Some nearly empty, some unopened, some glowing faintly in the firelight, each one a story, each one a desperate prayer. And in that quiet, you can almost hear it, the sigh of relief as someone finally drifts into chemically assisted sleep. The gentle snore of a baby sedated with syrup. The restless dream of a poet half lost in absinthe visions. The silence of a household at peace, at least for a few hours. The legacy of the Victorian chemical age isn't just about addiction or poison. It's about survival. It's about the strange, messy, often dangerous ways people search for comfort in a world that gave them so little of it. And in their fumbling, desperate remedies, we see echoes of ourselves. Different bottles, different names, but the same search for relief. So tonight, as we close the lid on this story, tuck yourself deeper under the covers and breathe easy, knowing your medicine cabinet doesn't contain arsenic wafers, mercury pills, or morphine syrup for infants. Be grateful for aspirin, for clean water, for doctors who don't prescribe brandy for breakfast. But also remember the Victorians with a little kindness. They were doing the best they could with what they had. Sleep well, dream of gaslit streets, clinking glasses and swirling green absintha. Dream of a world that was both harder and stranger than our own, yet full of people just like us. People who laughed, worried, suffered, and searched for comfort wherever they could find it. And as the fog rolls over London one last time, may your dreams be gentle, free of laudanum, free of arsenic, free of bromide fog, just quiet, restful, and safe.